Injuries. Season hasn't even started yet. Pistons are dealing with a ton of them. We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. And if you guys want to stay with the Locked On Network, make your second listen of today, checking out that Locked On Fantasy Basketball app or podcast with Josh Lloyd as the host. If you're interested in fantasy basketball, he does a great job over there previewing the upcoming fantasy basketball season. So make sure you guys go and make that your second listen of today. But if today's your guys' first listen to the Locked On Pistons podcast, I am your host, Kuka Hill, per usual. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. You can also find me on YouTube at Kuz Ballroom. You can also find me over at Detroit Bad Boy. Find articles about the Pistons. And guys, on today's podcast, today, actually, if you're listening to this audio, this is the first episode that's going to be on YouTube over at Locked On Pistons on YouTube. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, you guys obviously can tell that this is the first episode on YouTube. I'm a little nervous, but, you know, I was doing YouTube for a long time before this, so we'll get into it. But on today's episode, man, like I said at the beginning, Pistons are dealing with a ton of injuries. Just the season hasn't even started yet, and they're just being derailed by injury after injury after injury. It's crazy. So we'll talk about that to start off the podcast. We'll also talk about, you know, apparently Killian Hayes is missing tomorrow's game as well. Saddiq Bey is in question. Cade Cunningham is also going to be out the game against the New York Knicks on Wednesday. So what are you going to watch for then in that game if all those guys are going to be out? We'll talk about that in the next segment. And also to end the podcast, we'll try to look at the lone bright spot I feel like that's been seen through two preseason games. So we'll talk about all that on today's podcast. But yeah, again, let's talk about some of these injuries, man. So we know that Cade Cunningham has been dealing with an ankle injury, and we've talked about it for a while now. It was about 2 weeks ago when it first came up, and we were told from Dwayne Casey when it first started, his injury was first reported to the public, that he wasn't that concerned about Cade missing the opening game of the preseason. And then the weekend happened going into the preseason game, and it completely flipped. Cade was not available for the opening preseason game, as we all understand. Now we're 2 games into the preseason, and Cade is still not available, and it's casting some doubt on whether he's going to be even available for the opening game of the regular season. I'm not worried about that. I think he will play to open the season. I think they're just being extremely cautious with him, as we've talked about many times before. But now Killian turned on the last game, and he's already out again. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the Pistons injury report ahead of this New York Knicks game. So as you can see on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, which once again, we're on YouTube, check it out at Locked On Pistons. But if you look at the injury report, this is what we're dealing with tomorrow today when you guys listen to this, against the New York Knicks. We got Derek Walton Jr. out. Cassius Stanley out. Chris Smith out. Rodney McGruder is questionable with that left hip strain. Isaiah Livers is still out with that right foot injury. Killian Hayes is now out with a concussion injury. I don't know when that happened. James Edwards of The Athletic tweeted out that it must have happened during a collision late in the game in the second half. I don't remember him having a collision for a loose ball in the second half. I remember him having that drive down the lane that he got and one on. But I can't pinpoint a specific play that he had this concussion on. I went back and looked. I couldn't see a specific play where it looked like he was really like dazed or anything. It may have been something they just picked up on after the game or today, maybe so. I don't know. But I didn't notice it. I don't think anyone really noticed it. It shocked everybody when the news came out that he had a concussion. And I don't believe they even talked about it either in the press conference they had today before practice or after practice. But so, yeah, it definitely caught everybody surprised that he was on this injury report. But, yeah, he has a concussion now. So how long is Killian going to be out? Who knows? Killian is already missed one game. He was having a good training camp, apparently. He was having a good practices in this game that he did play. He did look more aggressive, but he still shot 2 of 9 from the field. So we wanted to see him play throughout the preseason, knock some of that rust off. But now he's out again. So Killian's dealing with something. Now Hamidou Diallo pops up on the injury report with the bilateral thoracic injury. I'm assuming it's just tightness in his but he'll be straight. It sounds like he's probable for the game against the New York Knicks. Jared Cunningham out. Cade is also out still with his ankle injury like we just talked about. And then Saddiq Bey is also now questionable with the ankle injury. He didn't even return in the second half of the last game against the Memphis Grizzlies. So we have multiple players on the Pistons dealing with ankle injuries. We now got Killian Hayes back on the injury report with a concussion. So the Pistons, they're dealing with a ton of injuries, and it's really tough. It's gonna be tough on them to try and make the chemistry all work together, because this is a really young group, especially in the starting lineup. They got Killian. If you are assuming what the starting lineup is going to be, it's going to be Killian, Cade, Saddiq Bey, Jeremy Grant, and Isaiah Stewart. When they get them all are all healthy, and none of them have all been healthy for a game yet. They haven't been able to really play together. Dwayne Casey talked about it a little bit today about how Cade Cunningham's missing a ton of time to get familiar with his teammates and familiar with the starting lineup, etc. But it's not even just Cade. Everybody in that starting lineup now is going to have to deal with chemistry issues. They're going to have to, they're going to be a step behind when everyone gets back together, because by the time they all play together, which who knows, I'm assuming, or at least hopeful, that that's going to happen on opening night for the Pistons. But who knows? We don't even know if that's the case yet. So it definitely is tough for this team, a young team like this with so many young guys in the starting lineup. You want them to get as many reps as possible. This is, I feel like, for young guys, especially in a new team like that, preseason is pretty important for that reason only, not to like look into the stats and see like, oh, who's shooting well or who's playing well, all that kind of thing. Knocking rust off is important, but more so for chemistry issues and to gel together and get familiar with your teammates. That is really important, I feel like, for a team like the Detroit Pistons, who have so many young guys, have a young roster, and have a starting lineup that's going to feature 4 first-round picks from the last year and a half of the Pistons history. Last year's draft, they had Killian Hayes, Saddiq Bey, and Isaiah Stewart. They're all going to be the starting lineup, and now you got the number 1 overall pick in Cade Cunningham. So you got 4 guys who is either a rookie or a second-year player in your starting lineup. They need as much time together as possible to gel, and they're missing this valuable time. We don't know when they're going to be back. Dwayne Casey came out and said that he's going to be very cautious with Cade Cunningham. He's not going to put a timetable on it at all. This is giving a lot of fans, I should say, some worries about when he's going to play. Is he going to play in the opening game? You guys have listened. If you guys have been listening to the podcast, you guys have heard me say multiple times, I'm not worried about him missing the opening night. I'm assuming that they're just being super careful with the number 1 overall pick in Cade Cunningham. Don't make him play games that don't matter. He's been shooting around after practice. He's been doing shooting drills. He's been doing all that kind of stuff. So if it was serious, he wouldn't be doing all that. And everything we've been told has been that it's not that serious of an injury. He's being games to be careful. But I do understand now why there were a few of you guys who said to me like last week, a week and a half ago, when this first came up, that Dwayne Casey, anytime Dwayne Casey talks about injury, you guys don't really want to believe it because sometimes he minimizes the injury, sometimes he doesn't talk enough about the injury, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of downplayed that, but definitely a week and a half ago, we were told that Cade was probably going to play in the opening game of the preseason, and they weren't worried about it. Now he's missed 2 games. We don't even know if he's going to be ready for the opening game of the season. So I get why fans could feel a type of way about that and the kind of communications that's being led. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Real quick, Dwayne Casey said today, we're not going to rush Cade back. He's too valuable for us. We'll sit down, meet with his team, the medical team, Troy, and map out a plan. Said he's missed out on the speed of the game, calls, and everything that comes with playing. Definitely that's not the most encouraging thing to hear, saying that he needs to sit down with his team and the medical team to come up with a plan. If it wasn't that serious, you wouldn't think they need to like sit everybody in the organization down damn near and talk about, okay, what's the plan to get him back on track? So that definitely, I understand why that could bring some negativity, but still I believe that they're just being cautious with it. If it was serious, he wouldn't be doing these drills after games. He wouldn't be shooting around, doing all the things he does after the game, or not after the games, but after practice and during practice. So I think he's going to be fine for opening night. But yeah, definitely has made preseason pretty tough to watch. And now that you add Killian Hayes' concussion issue, along with Saddiq Bey's left ankle sprain, so it's definitely tough for the Pistons. They're dealing with a ton of injuries right now to a lot of their roster. So hopefully they just make it to regular season with no more injuries, and hopefully these guys start to come back and are ready to play by October 20th. But coming up, we'll talk about the one thing, or not the one thing, but what to watch for in this game against the New York Knicks on Wednesday. Now that Cade and Killian are going to be out, what is it to even watch for? What should you be looking for? We'll talk about that in this upcoming segment. But first, let me tell you about some of our sponsors. First up, let me tell you about SweatBlock. There's some issues that you just don't want to talk about. Relationship issues, family problems, or more importantly, sweating through your shirt for no reason when out in the public with the boys or girls. Yes, you heard me. Everyone has been there. Simply wearing deodorant doesn't help either. But SweatBlock antiperspirant wipes can help. SweatBlock is doctor created and doctor recommended. You simply apply it at night before bedtime go to bed. Then the next day you wake up and do your normal routines like nothing ever happened. Except this time without the worry of sweating through your shirt. SweatBlock works for up to 7 days per use and has dry shirt guarantee. If SweatBlock doesn't keep you dry, you get your money back. If you or someone you know is dealing with the worst issue in life of sweating through their t-shirt with nothing you can do about it, tell them about SweatBlock. Get it today for 20% off at sweatblock.com with promo code LOCKEDON or at Amazon and CVS. Get SweatBlock now and stop sweating. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what should we watch for in this game against the New York Knicks. There's a few things, I guess. First of all, let me just be honest with you guys. It's going to be a tough watch. It's going to be it 100% is going to be a bit of a tough watch to get through, especially with Cade and Killian not performing in this game. But there's a few things that you can watch for in this game, I guess. The main thing I would say to look forward to seeing is, does the team bounce back from that humiliating loss to the Memphis Grizzlies? They got blown out really bad, 30-plus points, and I understand it's preseason, but that's unacceptable in the regular season. It's unacceptable in the preseason as well. Getting blown up by 30 points is never okay. I don't care if it's just an exhibition. You don't want to go out there and get embarrassed like that. It's just not the case. So you hope that they come out against the New York Knicks, a team that made the playoffs last year, and you expect them to beat the Pistons even if it's preseason. But as long as the Knicks play all their guys, which it looks like they're going to play a good majority of them, but they'll probably beat the Pistons. But you hope to see like a better fight from the Pistons and them keep the game close. So that's the first thing I'd say to watch for is this. Does this team fight? Do they get blown out again, or do they keep it close, be competitive throughout the game, and just feel more engaged in the game? A lot of times during the last game against the Memphis Grizzlies, they just really felt out of it. They treated it like a pickup game, is how I described it in the last podcast. They didn't look like they took it very seriously, and they treated it like a preseason game, which on some occasions and some things that's fair. If you're trying to test out some things and putting players in uncomfortable situations that you wouldn't really put them in regular season, try improve, help them develop, and just get that kind of thing going, fair enough. But to get blown up by 30 and just not really be engaged defensively, not run back on defense, do the minor things like boxing out guys, does all those kind of things in the preseason, definitely was disappointing to see. Whether it's preseason or regular season, like I said, definitely was disappointing. So hopefully the Pistons come back and they give a little bit more fight against the New York Knicks, and they don't go out there and get destroyed against the Knicks. That would suck if they went out and got blown up by 30 again. So that's the first thing I would say to watch for. The next thing I would say to watch for is, how do they handle the starting lineup now? I have to assume that we're probably going to see Saban Lee in the starting lineup at point guard now that Killian and Cade are out the game. Dwayne Casey has said on multiple occasions he wants to keep that bench unit together. He wants to keep that locked together so he can at least have one group that has good gel together, has good chemistry, and is able to get familiar with each other. And the bench has been fine in preseason. They've been better than the starters, I would say. So at least he has one unit that's playing decent and getting familiar with each other. So there's no need to want to break that up. You want to keep that together. So I'm going to assume that in the starting lineup, they're probably going to start Saban Lee. And I'm going to also assume they're going to continue to start Frank Jackson at shooting guard as he gets some needed spacing to that starting lineup that's going to feature Isaiah Stewart, who's not shooting that well in preseason thus far, and is not, even going back to last year, is not a stretch big, not a terrible shooter, but not a great shooter either. And with Saddiq Bey possibly missing the game as well, that you need as much shooting in that starting lineup to balance out some things as well. So then also, if Saddiq Bey misses the game, who's going to start in Saddiq Bey's place? That will be interesting as well. So I don't know how they're going to do that without breaking up the bench unit. If Saddiq Bey also can't go, I think it's going to be inevitable that someone's going to have to go from that bench unit to the starting lineup, unless they decide to start Jamarco Pickett. I don't think that they would do that, but it'll be interesting to see. We'll see what they do. If they don't go Pickett, I think they would go either Josh Jackson, Hamidou Diallo, obviously. And I think Josh, this is the thing, Josh has really played well. I'm going to tease a little bit the last segment of the podcast. He's one of the lone bright spots in the preseason thus far through 2 games. So Josh has been playing pretty well with that bench unit and with the guys that they've been surrounding him with. He's been playing pretty well. So he's probably the best player so far off the bench for the Pistons, and he's probably one of their best players in preseason thus far. So I would think that you could like give him the starting minutes and play him a lot more and play him with the stars. It's like kind of a reward. Or you could continue to play him with the guys that he's been playing with, and don't try and mess up the groove and keep him going how you've been doing, because it seems like it's helping for him. So you don't really want to knock him out of rhythm or do anything that could possibly ruin that. So I get both sides of that. My guess is going to be that they probably start Hamidou Diallo there. So my guess, if all three of those guys, and Cade, Killian, and Sadiq all don't play tomorrow, I'm going to go with Saban Lee, Frank Jackson, and Hamidou Diallo as the starters in the lineup tomorrow next to Jeremy Grant and Isaiah Stewart, which that's not going to be very, very good spacing at all. But it is what it is. It's preseason, so it doesn't really matter as much, really. But definitely not the kind of spacing that you'd want in the starting lineup. But, when injuries come and take out damn near your whole starting lineup, there's nothing you can really do about it. So that's another thing to watch for, see what the starting lineup's going to look like. Also, this is the next thing that kind of has a little bit to do with the starting lineup as well. But Hamidou Diallo, I believe he's going to get a lot more minutes because of the injuries. So how does he react to it? I don't think he's played that well so far for the Pistons, honestly. We talked about it a little bit on the last podcast. It just kind of confuses me. It not confuses me, but someone who's played basketball all their lives, and for professional athletes who play basketball every day, it really doesn't make sense to me how a guy as gifted as Hamidou Diallo at getting to the basket and finishing around the rim, the kind of touch he has around the rim, that as soon as he steps away from the basket, everything just doesn't look. It looks like he's just lost. So his jump shot hasn't looked that good, hasn't looked that improved. He's taken a few off the dribble jumpers that hasn't looked that good. And also, they've been playing him a different type of way that he hasn't had the ball in his hands as much as well. So I'm going to be interested to see how he plays to finish out the preseason, because he is fighting for minutes, I think, with Frank Jackson, Josh Jackson, and himself for the backup 2 and 3 spots. So, Frank Jackson just had a great week of practice, apparently, and a great open scrimmage. He didn't play that well in the last preseason game either, but really nobody did. So I'm just not even taking away anything from that last preseason game. No one really played well in that game. It was a piss poor effort by the entire team. So I'm not going to really take away anything from that, but Hamidou Diallo needs to realize that, or not needs to, I'm sure he knows that's the wrong wording, but he is competing with those other two guys. And I feel like so far, if I'm based off the 2 preseason games, what we've heard from Frank Jackson, that Hamidou Diallo may be the guy left out. And I don't know. I've said multiple times I'd like to see all 3 of them in the bench lineup, but I think they're probably going to go with Trey Lyles right now as the backup 4. So he's competing with those minutes. So if Sadiq Bey does miss this game and he gets that start and he gets these elevated minutes, hopefully he does something with it, and he plays pretty well, because I think he really does need it. And that's if he even plays too, because he's on the injury report too, and he's probable, but he's on the injury report too, so he could possibly even miss. So if he does play, I hope he plays well, and that's something to watch for as well, the play of Diallo. So that's another thing to watch for. So let me know what you guys are watching for in today's game against the New York Knicks on Twitter at Kuka Hill or at Locked On Pistons, or in the reviews down below if you're watching this on or listening to this on Apple Podcasts, or if now that I'm on YouTube and recording this video, you can let me know in the comment section down below as well. What are you guys looking forward to in the game against the New York Knicks? But coming up, we're going to talk about one of the lone bright spots for the Pistons through 2 preseason games. Now, I've said multiple times, preseason games do not matter that much. They just don't. They don't matter that much. You shouldn't take away too much from it. But there is a lone bright spot, and we'll talk about that. And I kind of teased it a little bit, and one of it, and the player I'm talking about, I should say, is Josh Jackson. So we'll talk about that coming up. But first, let me tell you about your favorite sponsor, Built Bar. The best tasting protein bar on the planet Earth comes with a variety of flavors, including 6 new flavors: and caramel brownie, cookies and cream, cherry barcia, lemon almond, carrot cake, and apple almond crisp. They also have a ton of other flavors like coconut, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, and German chocolate. All kinds of flavors for you guys to try. All of these flavors come in incredible tasting chocolate and are soft and easy on the teeth to chew. These bars are low in calorie and sugar, but high in protein and fiber. The flavor I suggest is the peanut butter flavor. Packed with 19 grams of protein, 180 calories, only 5 grams of sugar, and 5 grams net carbs. So go try the Built Bar. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCK15 and you'll get 15% off your next order. Again, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Josh Jackson and how he played in the preseason thus far. So Josh Jackson, like I said, I think he's been one of the lone bright spots. So Dwayne Casey has mentioned multiple times throughout the training camp and throughout preseason that one of the things, and he mentioned this in the offseason too, before training camp even started, that one of the things with Josh Jackson that he desperately needed to improve on, and his biggest need for improvement, was his decision making. And I completely agreed with that. Now, if you guys followed and listened to how I talked about Saddiq Bey throughout the offseason, it was the kind of the same thing with Saddiq Bey. I needed his processing to get better. I wanted to see him react to defenses better, make better decisions with the ball, not shoot shots that he just probably wouldn't be able to make. And all those things could be attributed to Josh Jackson as well. So we got to see a little bit of that in the preseason games. And even before the preseason games, Dwayne Casey was telling us that Josh Jackson looked great in that element. He looked great in the training camp. He looked great in the open scrimmages, the practices, etc. He's looked good in that department. So we were entering into the preseason to see, well, we've heard this kind of thing before. Let's see if he's actually telling the truth. And through 2 games, I can say he 100% is telling the truth that he's improved that. So far through 2 preseason games, what we've seen in those 2 preseason games, he has looked improved in that department. Now, I'll caution you guys and tell you guys this. Last year, if you guys remember, Josh Jackson looked like a sharpshooter in preseason. And he came out, someone asked him the question, I forget who it was, but someone asked him, is that something you really worked on? And he said, yeah, I want guys to start respecting my jumper. You're not going to be able to sag off me no more. And then after a great shooting preseason, it completely crashed to the ground, and guys were sagging off him anyways, and it was just like how it was before all his career. So, again, it's preseason. Don't get too caught up with what's happening in preseason because, again, it doesn't really matter, and it's too small of a sample size to really decide anything with these guys. Guys could have a great shooting preseason and then not really be a good shooter still. Guys who are great shooters could have a terrible shooting preseason and then have a good shooting season in the regular season. So, again, preseason, I just want to keep letting you guys know it doesn't matter that much. Don't read too much into it. But if we're going to talk about the lone bright spot is that Josh Jackson has looked improved in the decision-making department. There was one play in this game against the Memphis Grizzlies and another play. They were both identical plays. They did basically the same. He did basically the same thing in both in the first preseason game and then against the Memphis Grizzlies. He had a drive that he took basically all the way to the rim. He got met by a weak side or a help defender and basically around the block area. And last year, Josh Jackson went up with it, try to force it. And the thing I talked about with Josh a lot is that he does those things a lot because he's able to finish, or he feels like he's able to finish some of these tough finishes around the rim. And he is able to make some tough finishes. But the reason why his efficiency has been down in his career and why he struggled at points in his career is because trying to live on those is not a recipe for success. You just won't do it. It won't happen. He can, just because you can do it every now and then does not mean you should be doing it all the time. Like if he wants to make a tough finish and force the issue sometimes when he feels like he can do it, it's okay to do that every now and then if you're that skilled in that department. But it should never be something you just live on because you're not going to be able to do that the whole time. And that's why his efficiency, he struggled throughout his career. So on these 2 drives that I'm talking about, he stopped, and instead of forcing it at the rim, he realized that a help defender came, and he kicked it. One of them, he found a cutter to the rim, and the other one, he kicked it to the left wing for a 3. And those 2 plays, those are like minor plays that, again, don't pop up in the box score unless the guys make the shot. But if you're watching the game for these and like watching little details like I do when I'm watching the game, things, if you want to see improvements and development-wise with players, those are tiny things that you want to see from guys like Josh Jackson to know that he's developing, he's making the right steps towards that in his maturity department on the court and decision-making. And I think he's shown that through 2 preseason games that he's doing pretty well with that. He's processing defenses pretty well. So Josh Jackson's been playing pretty well. He's been really good. I think the one guy you can actually say that's been good, actually, like use the word good in the preseason thus far. But, yeah, he's one of the low bright spots. You can also talk about Corey Joseph as well. He's probably actually been good too. But I feel like a lot of – you guys don't really want to hear me talk about Corey Joseph as well. But I've said multiple times, I don't understand how he ended up on the Pistons again. I really feel like he probably could go help a contender somewhere. But it was the Pistons got him back. I think he's going to be a really good backup point guard. He was a really good backup point guard, or basically a starting point guard sometimes last year for the Pistons. But he was a really good backup point guard, and he's continuing through 2 preseason games to show that he's going to be a really good backup point guard for the Pistons, a really good veteran to have on the team. And James Edwards of The Athletic actually just wrote a really good article talking about his personality more. And I think he actually, basically in the article, he said that if you guys knew Corey Joseph, he would be a fan favorite. Like if you actually knew his personality, he would be a fan favorite. I think he's a pretty funny guy. If you go and read it, I think you guys will like Corey Joseph even more. He definitely is a pretty funny guy, cool guy. And that was a great article by James. So make sure you guys go check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, Josh Jackson and Corey Joseph, I think, are two of the lone bright spots on the team. Kelly Olynyk was one of the bright spots as of the first game, but then he really struggled in the second game. But yeah, listen, guys, it's preseason. I'm trying to analyze things. I'm trying to analyze what's happening in front of me while also understanding it's preseason, not trying to actually sound like I care too much about it, because I don't really care too much about what happens in the preseason, as you guys shouldn't. It's a glorified practice. It is what it is. So it definitely, I feel like it's more for entertainment purposes, to be honest. Like, I'm not mad that the guys are missing games tomorrow or that they got blown out by 30 points because it impacts the Pistons' future or it impacts their record or guys don't look as good. I'm worried about their development. Like, that's really not what the case is. I'm mad about this more from a perspective of entertainment-wise. Like, I don't want to watch this game tomorrow. Like, I don't feel like anyone really wants to watch the game as much as they would have if Cade Cunningham, Killian Hayes, and Sadiq Bey are missing. Like, it's just not going to be as fun to watch. Like, you're only going to see these guys for 15, 20 minutes a game, and now you don't get to see them at all. And now you have to see more bench players, more guys you're not going to see, not guys who are just not going to play as good of basketball and give you a product that you really want to watch as much. Again, it's preseason. I'm more upset about this from an entertainment perspective. I don't think you guys should read into much of anything happening in the preseason. Again, I just don't think you guys should. I'm going to keep reiterating that. I said it 10 times already on this podcast. I'm going to keep saying it throughout all the podcasts leading up to October 20th because it just is the truth. You don't want to read too much into it. Again, I'll use the example from last year. Josh Jackson looked like Ray Allen in preseason and then crashed down to earth in regular season, went right back to how he was throughout the season. So it's just too small of a sample size to care. And a lot of these guys are knocking off rust. By the way, before we end the podcast real quick, Isaiah Stewart said today that this is, I said it on a podcast a few podcasts ago, that I think this might be Isaiah Stewart's first 5-on-5, legit play all offseason because he dealt with the ankle injury. And Isaiah Stewart did confirm that today in a press conference or interview after practice that, yeah, this is basically his first 5-on-5 gameplay all offseason because he had dealt with that ankle injury. So if I've mentioned how he's looked rusty, he hasn't looked that good, that's clearly why. And that's what you look forward for preseason. So that's another reason why you just don't really read into anything in preseason because a lot of these guys are just knocking off rust. So the guy like Isaiah Stewart that you're seeing now in preseason, you're not going to see that same kind of guy in regular season. He's going to have some rust knocked off. He's going to be in better game shape, and he's probably going to be playing better. So don't read too much into anything in the preseason. Just try to have fun. That's really why I would tell you guys. Just try to have fun and look for minor bright spots and things to get happy about, and look at the process. Like, for example, and we'll wrap the podcast off with this. Killian Hayes had a great drive last game. He didn't finish the layup. But the process to get there is an improvement. He wasn't taking those kind of drives last season. You guys know what drive I'm talking about, coming down the left wing. He was able to split defenders, get through a big guy, get underneath him, which he just didn't really do. He liked to fade away from the basket. But this one, he went through contact, got underneath the big man, and went for a layup. Probably got fouled, I think, on it. But either way, the process to getting there was fun to see. And those are the kind of things you guys should be looking forward to seeing this in the preseason. Not so much the end result and everything, but the process. And you'll have fun doing it. So thank you again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys go and check out Locked On Pistons on YouTube. We are recording right now for you guys watching this. We're recording this on YouTube, and we have our first video coming out on here. I'll say this for you guys listening to here or watching on here. This was an adjustment. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but this was an adjustment. And hopefully it gets a little bit better. I'll have some more things in the background coming soon. Promise. It'll look better. You guys won't be able to flame me much longer about my plain background, even though I got some cool lights above. But anyways, thank you guys for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you guys go give Locked On Fantasy Basketball a listen after this with Josh Lloyd, the host. He's doing a great job previewing the fantasy basketball season. Make sure you guys go check that out. If you guys like fantasy basketball, you guys are going to be participating in this season. And also make sure you guys use the Sleeper app, one of our sponsors. It's a great fantasy basketball app. You guys are going to love it. So if you guys are interested in that, not only do you go get a head start on your friends by listening to Locked On Fantasy podcast, but you also want to use the Sleeper app. It gives you the best chance to win. So thank you guys for listening to today's podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoy the game tonight. Hopefully the Pistons get healthier. And by October 20th, we're not having this discussion about injuries. But until the next podcast, I'll see you guys later. Thank you guys for watching and listening today. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, everybody. And by the way, I know you guys watching really like this teal hat. It's something special, isn't it? All right. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out, everybody.